It's my pleasure tonight to introduce to you Virginia's Senior Senator, Mark Warner. Senator Warner has been recognized as a national leader fighting for our military men and women and veterans, and working to design a bipartisan comprehensive plan to address our country debt and deficits. We know Mark Warner prides himself on his basketball skills, and I wonder whether he has ever challenged President Obama on the court. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you our senior senator, Mark Warner.
Thank you, Sue. Hello, Fairfax Democrats. Thank you. Let me first of all say to our chair, thanks, Sue, for being our Fairfax County chair. Dick Saslaw, you can sit down now. I think anyone who is willing to be a Democratic Party chair at any level, having had the honor of being Virginia's state party chair at one point, but anybody who has ever been served at a magisterial district chair, county chair, congressional district chair, ought to get two things. One is a guaranteed spot in heaven. And second is a lifetime of psychiatric counseling until they get there, because it's hard to keep Democrats happy. But Sue, thank you for what you do. I just came from Loudoun County, and I think we're going to be, Ralph Northam is coming right behind us, and John Faust, our next congressman from the 10th District. But I was with Ralph yesterday on the Eastern Shore at the Seafood Festival in Chincoteague, and I apologize about coming in and talking. I have to leave tonight and go to New York for fundraisers tomorrow morning, then back for votes. But tonight is a very special night. I know Mitch is going to do the keynote, so I'm going to be brief, but I can't think of a better person that we all honor as not just Fairfax County Democrats, Virginia Democrats, Alexandria Democrats. There's even a few odds and ends Arlingtonians and Falls Churchians here, than somebody who has served as my mayor and our congressman, someone who, you know, there are many people in politics that are sometimes there, but sometimes you feel like they're only giving you half a loaf. With the congressman from the 8th District, whether you agreed with him or not, this was somebody who always has stood up for democratic values, someone that we are proud to call our friend. Give it up for Jim Moran. I've used this line before, but Jim Moran sometimes says what the rest of us just think. That was Saslaw too. But through thick and thin. And I tell you, Raise your hand if you are not running for the 8th District Democratic nomination. There's nothing like Jim has created a seat that a lot of folks want to go for, but I think this is great for our Democratic Party. I think it's great that we've got this contest, and we are going to keep the 8th District Democratic. And while we talk about the 10th and we talk about the 8th, let's also make sure, I know he's going to give an address a little bit later tonight, somebody who's been a friend for years, somebody who does a great job fighting for common sense in a place that doesn't have a lot of common sense all the time, Jerry Conway. You know, Sue asked me if I have asked President Obama to play basketball with me. He's afraid of my elbows. But over the last, I was in Virginia Beach on Friday night, and there were a whole lot of young Democrats there, just as there are a whole lot of young Democrats here tonight. And a couple folks said to me, you know, Senator, you were a business guy. Why are you a Democrat? And I said quite honestly, because the only reason I've been blessed to have some success is because I went to good public schools all my life. Because there was a student loan program that allowed me, when I didn't have money, to get through college. That while I had some business success, what people don't often tell is my first 2 businesses failed miserably, and for months and months and months I was living out of my car. But what this country gave me, and time and again what the Democratic Party has always been about, is making sure that everybody in America gets a fair shot. And that's why we're here tonight as Democrats. And in an America and a Virginia that is getting more diverse, that looks more like this room, we ought to make sure that fair shot continues to be available, not just for us, but for our kids and our kids' kids. And I am proud of the fact that I am, in many ways, and certain times have gotten some of you all mad, reflexively bipartisan, because I do believe you need to find ways to reach across the aisle and get things done. But I got to tell you, in the United States Congress, and for that matter, in Richmond as well, there's a whole lot of folks that don't want to meet you even halfway. What is it in America that ought to be about expanding opportunity? An America that we ought to encourage more Americans to participate in our electoral process, that in Virginia and at the congressional level, we have efforts going on to restrict people's right to vote. That is not an American way going forward in the 21st century. What is it? And I applaud our Attorney General. What is it that's un-American about saying that somebody who was young, who was brought here, grew up in Fairfax County, went to Fairfax County schools, went to Fairfax County high schools, and then wants to go to college, we ought to give that dreamer a chance and a shot. And at the national level, Alfonso, I got to tell you, it makes no sense that we have such a broken immigration system. What is smart about an immigration policy that says we still bring the best and the brightest from around the world to get a PhD at George Mason or Virginia Tech in electrical engineering, and then we say, but we don't want you to then stay here and bring that job and that work. And what's crazy about it now is that person doesn't have to go back to their home country. They simply have to go to Canada, because Canada, Australia, the UK has made rational immigration policies. Pass immigration reform now. And you know, last week in the United States Senate, in an America where when I first went to work, the minimum wage was $1.70. That $1.70 doesn't even translate to the same buying power at $7.25. In America, if you work full-time at the minimum wage, you ought to be able to put food on the table for your family. We need to increase the minimum wage. The issues go on, and that's why we've got to keep the 8th Democratic. It's why we've got to make sure Jerry gets reelected. It's why we've got to make sure the 10th in John Faust gets elected. And, by the way, I'd like to get rehired, too. I know in Virginia, we always say, and there's no rest for the weary, we always say, you know, this year is the most important year. This year is the election year that's the most important. For Jerry and me and John and whoever wins the 8th, this year we really mean it. It is the most important year because, candidly, sometimes we as Democrats, we do well in presidential years. Last year, we had the starkest choice I can think in modern history between our candidates from Terry and Ralph and Mark and the opposition. I still wonder how Ralph's opponent got 45% of the vote. But sometimes in congressional years, we don't always turn out as much. We've got to make sure that in 2014, we turn out Democrats and right-thinking Virginians the same way we did in 2013 and 2012. Are you with me on that? Because 2 more minutes. The issue, and many of you have heard me talk about over the last 5 years. I'm a little bit of a budget nerd. The issue that I get obsessed about, the issue, and there are many, many issues we've got to deal with in our nation, domestically and internationally. But if that fair shot that I had is going to be available for all Virginians and all Americans going forward, we do have to get our balance sheet right. Right now in America, we got $17 trillion in debt. That number goes up by $4 billion every night. That's a lot of money even by Jim Moran standards. And you know, for all the money we send to Washington, only 16 cents goes to everything that in Washington speak is called domestic discretionary. That means everything that goes to energy, the environment, early childhood, education, infrastructure, research and development. And the Republican plan is to take that 16 cents and actually cut it by 70% under the Ryan budget to 4 cents over the next 12 years. Now, I have to acknowledge I was a business guy longer than I've been in elective office. I've invested in a lot of businesses. I would never invest in a business that spent less than 5% of its revenues training and equipping its workforce. Investing in plant and equipment, which for a country is your infrastructure. And staying ahead of the competition in a global economy, which is research and development. So we need to make sure, Mitt Romney wouldn't have invested in that either, frankly. But we've got to make sure from the issues about immigration, discrimination, voting rights, minimum wage, but we also have to make sure that this nation can continue to invest in educating our people, in being great in terms of building an infrastructure to stay competitive, to make sure that we continue to innovate in a way that creates the great next new revolution in medical research and IT research. But that's going to require folks who can actually not only read a balance sheet, but make the hard choices to get it right. And quite honestly, while I'm proud to be bipartisan, there's a whole lot of folks on the other side that don't want to even meet you halfway. We see that right now playing out in Richmond. I got to tell you, as somebody who's, again, what is fiscally conservative about sending $5 million of our tax dollars every day to Maryland, New York, Illinois, and otherwise, while close to 400,000 Virginians go without health care. So Dick Saslaw, Ralph Northern, and I know Terry will stay strong on this issue. And while there are challenges around the Affordable Care Act, and there are places we can improve, remember, but for that, you wouldn't have had 8 million more Americans have health insurance today than 3 years ago. You wouldn't have had millions of young people being able to stay on their parents' programs without that. So if there are places to be changed, let's change it. But let's remember that this country needs to continue to move forward. I'll close with this because there's many more speakers. There are moments, and Ralph has heard this story a couple of times now, so I apologize. There are moments, Jim, that any of us who've served in elective office, when you kind of scratch your head about serving. And one of these moments happened to me about a month ago. Margot, I was coming to work, and I was doing a radio interview with a radio station down in Virginia Beach. Now, it wasn't the NPR station. It was called Rumble in the Morning. So they asked me about the Navy, and they asked me about the budget. But then the guy asked me, he said, Senator, I've got one more question for you. He goes, what do you think about the efforts to deport Justin Bieber? Well, I hadn't ever been asked that. So I thought for a moment, I said, I don't know as a senator, but as a father of 3 daughters from 19 to 24, where do I sign? Here was the part, though. I had to go to a hearing. I had to give a speech. It was 2.5 hours before I got into my office. And I got to the office, and things were going crazy in the office. Phones were ringing. People were running around like mad. And my press guy comes up to me and goes, Senator, we have had more press inquiries in 2.5 hours on Justin Bieber than 5 years of you working on the budget. But a couple days after that, there was one incident that was kind of interesting because, you know, Justin Bieber is Canadian. And this is not what I said. I know in the age of digital, everything you say can and will be used against you. But there was somebody up in Canada, I think, who put up a poster that said simply, we'll take Bieber back, you keep Cruz. Wasn't what I said. But in these days of challenging politics, in these days where we ask you every year to come out and help those of us who serve, the stakes have never been higher. The challenges have never been greater, whether they're in Richmond or in Washington. We owe our country, we owe our president, we owe all of those who want to have the same kind of fair shot that I and many of us in this room had, to make sure that this year we turn out once again in record numbers, that we keep our majority in the Senate, that we increase our numbers in the House, and that we make sure that Virginia in the 21st century and America in the 21st century is a place where everybody gets that fair shot. Let's go out and win this year. Thank you, Fairfax County Democrats.